The text came through at 11:47 p.m. I was still at my desk, debugging a memory leak in the payment processing module. Her message was 3 lines, no context, no warmth. I filed the papers today. Divorce is final in 72 hours under California law. I already moved your things to your brother's place. Don't come back to the apartment. I stared at the screen for maybe 10 seconds. The cursor blinked. My coffee had gone cold an hour ago. I typed back one word. Okay. Then I opened my personal email and scrolled to a message I'd been waiting 6 months to see. Subject line, Equity Vesting Confirmation, NextBridge Technologies. I clicked it. The numbers loaded. 125,000 advisory shares. Current pre-IPO valuation, $68 per share. Total value, $8.5 million. Vesting date, March 15th, exactly 90 days from today. I smiled, closed my laptop, and drove to my brother's apartment in Oakland. My name is Marcus Chen. I'm a senior software engineer, or I was until 3 weeks ago when I quit my job at a logistics startup to join NextBridge full-time as their first technical hire. That was 4 years ago, back when NextBridge was just 3 people in a WeWork space in Soma, building API infrastructure for e-commerce platforms. My wife, Jennifer, thought I was insane. She was a marketing director at a Fortune 500, pulling in $180K a year with stock options and a benefits package that covered everything. I was taking a $95K salary and something she called fantasy shares in a company that might not exist in 6 months. But here's what she didn't know. 6 months into my time at NextBridge, the founders offered me a choice. Standard employee equity, 4-year vest with a 1-year cliff, or a smaller advisory share package that would vest based on performance milestones, not time. The advisory shares were riskier, fewer total shares, but they came with one critical difference. They were classified as consultant compensation, not employee equity. And under California law, assets acquired through consulting work during a marriage could be argued as separate property if documented correctly, especially if the work was performed outside of marital duties and the agreement was signed before the marriage produced joint financial obligations. I took the advisory package. I had our family lawyer, the one who helped us set up our wills, draft the consulting agreement. I never told Jennifer. Not because I was planning for divorce, but because I knew her. She'd want to renegotiate, get more, turn it into a fight with the founders. And I needed this job. I believed in what we were building. That was 4 years ago. NextBridge grew. We went from 3 people to 150, from 0 revenue to $50 million ARR, from a Series A to a Series C. And 6 months ago we announced our IPO. Goldman Sachs was leading. The roadshow was scheduled. We were going public at a $4 billion valuation. My advisory shares, which had been worthless on paper, were suddenly worth real money. A lot of it, that's when things changed at home. Jennifer started talking about the house we'd buy in Marin, the Tesla she wanted, the vacation property in Tahoe. She'd mention my stock options at dinner parties, tell her friends I was about to be a tech millionaire. I never corrected her. I just listened, because she wasn't asking about me, about the 80-hour weeks, the stress, the nights I slept in the office because our deployment broke production. She was asking about the money. And then one night, 2 months before the IPO, she sat me down at our kitchen table in our rent-controlled apartment in the Mission and said, I want to understand the equity situation. I talked to a financial advisor. We need to plan for tax optimization. I showed her the employee equity portal. 15,000 shares, standard 4-year vest. Current value, maybe $900K post-IPO if we were lucky. She looked confused. That's it? She said. I thought you were employee number 1. I am, I said. But I took a different package. Lower equity, higher salary. That was technically true. The advisory shares weren't in the employee portal. They were in a separate agreement between me and the founders, structured through an LLC I'd set up for consulting work. She didn't push it. She just got quiet. And 3 weeks later, she filed for divorce. I spent the next 72 hours moving into my brother David's second bedroom in Oakland. He didn't ask questions, just helped me unload boxes and ordered pizza. On the 3rd night, he finally said, You doing okay? Yeah, I said. I'm good. He looked at me like I was lying, but I wasn't, because I'd checked the vesting schedule that morning. The advisory shares had specific performance milestones tied to the IPO. Once we filed our S1 with the SEC, a clock started, 180 days later. Regardless of whether I was still employed, the shares would vest. We'd filed the S1 4 months ago. The IPO was happening in 6 weeks. The shares would vest 90 days after that, in mid-March. The divorce would be final in 70 days, mid-January. 2 months before the money became real, Jennifer moved fast. She stayed in our apartment, the one we'd lived in for 5 years. She changed her relationship status on social media to single within a week. By week 2, she was posting photos at rooftop bars in Soma with her coworkers, drinking champagne, hashtags about new beginnings and living my truth. By week 3, there were photos with a guy. Tall, finance bro type, tagged as VP of Business Development at some crypto startup. His Instagram showed a Porsche and a penthouse view. I didn't react. I just kept working. NextBridge went public on February 8th. The stock opened at $72, up from the $68 IPO price. By end of day, we were at $79. My 15,000 employee shares were now worth about $1.1 million minus taxes. My 125,000 advisory shares, which weren't public knowledge, were worth $9.8 million. I got a text from Jennifer that night. Congrats on the IPO. Hope you're doing well. I didn't respond. March 15th landed on a Tuesday. I woke up in David's apartment, made coffee, and checked my email. The vesting confirmation came through at 6 a.m. Your advisory shares have vested. Please contact the company's equity administrator to proceed with transfer or sale. I called my lawyer, the same one who drafted the original consulting agreement. Her name was Patricia Nguyen, and she'd been practicing family law in California for 20 years. Marcus, she said. I've been waiting for this call. You ready? Yeah, I said. What happens now? Now, she said, we wait for her to make the first move. It took 6 hours. Jennifer's lawyer sent a letter at noon. The subject line was Division of Marital Assets, NextBridge Technologies Equity. The letter claimed that my advisory shares were marital property because they were earned during the marriage and should be split 50/50 under California community property law. They were demanding disclosure of all equity agreements and threatening a lawsuit if I didn't comply. Patricia's response went out at 2 p.m. It was 3 pages, but it boiled down to one argument. The advisory shares were consultant compensation for work performed under a separate business entity, documented and contracted before the marriage incurred any joint debts or shared assets. They were classified as separate property under California Family Code Section 770. The divorce had been finalized on January 18th. The shares vested on March 15th. The timeline was clean. Jennifer's lawyer pushed back. They filed a motion claiming I'd hidden assets during the divorce proceedings. That I'd deliberately concealed the advisory shares to avoid community property division. They wanted the divorce reopened. We went to court on April 3rd. San Francisco Superior Court, Judge Margaret Rothstein presiding. I sat in the back with Patricia. Jennifer sat up front with her lawyer, a guy in a $3,000 suit who kept shuffling papers like he was looking for something he'd lost. Judge Rothstein read through the motions, looked at the consulting agreement, looked at the vesting schedule, and then looked at Jennifer's lawyer. Counsel, she said, your client filed for divorce in December, correct? Yes, Your Honor. And the divorce was finalized in January? Yes, Your Honor. And these shares vested in March? Yes, and you're arguing they should be considered marital property despite vesting after the dissolution of the marriage? Jennifer's lawyer hesitated. Your Honor, we believe Mr. Chen deliberately structured the equity arrangement to avoid. Do you have evidence of that? Judge Rothstein said. Evidence that he knew the marriage would end? Evidence that he structured this agreement with the intent to hide assets. Silence. The consulting agreement was signed in 2020, the judge continued. The divorce was filed in 2024. That's 4 years. Unless you're arguing Mr. Chen has precognitive abilities. I'm not seeing fraud here. She denied the motion. The advisory shares were separate property. Case closed. I walked out of the courthouse at 2:30 p.m. Patricia shook my hand on the steps. You just won $9.8 million, she said. No, I said. I just kept what I earned. The story hit TechCrunch 2 days later. Not because I wanted it to, but because someone in the courtroom had connections. The headline was NextBridge Engineer Wins $10M Equity Battle Against Ex-Wife in Landmark California Case. They got the number wrong, but close enough. The article framed it as a cautionary tale about equity structures and community property law. It didn't mention Jennifer by name, but her LinkedIn was public, and people figured it out fast. The comment section was brutal. Half the people called me a con artist. The other half called her a gold digger. I didn't read past the first page. What I did instead was call my accountant and my lawyer and set up a meeting. We met at a coffee shop in the Sunset, away from the tech scene, away from the noise. I want to do something with this money, I said. Something that matters. Patricia leaned back. You thinking charity? Yeah, I said. But specific. I want to fund coding boot camps for kids who can't afford them. Low-income families, foster care, first-generation immigrants. The kind of kids who don't get recruited to Stanford or Berkeley. I want to give them a shot at this industry. My accountant, Paul, pulled out his laptop. How much are you thinking? $2 million upfront, I said. Then a percentage of whatever I make going forward. Set it up as a nonprofit. I'll sit on the board, but I don't want my name plastered everywhere. Call it the Bridge Foundation or something. Keep it simple. We launched the Bridge Foundation in May. The first cohort started in June, 40 kids from East Oakland, Richmond, and the Tenderloin. Free laptops, free tuition, free mentorship. We partnered with local high schools and community centers. By August, we had 120 kids enrolled. By October, the first graduates were getting job offers at startups and mid-sized tech companies, making $70K to $90K straight out of high school. The local news picked it up. Tech millionaire turns divorce settlement into opportunity for underprivileged youth. Again, they got the story wrong. It wasn't a settlement, it was my money. But the sentiment was right, and applications to the program tripled. Jennifer reached out in November. Not through lawyers, just a direct email to my personal account. Subject line, I'm sorry. The email was short. She said she'd made a mistake. That she'd been scared of being left behind when I got successful, so she left first. That she'd listened to the wrong people, made decisions out of fear, and hurt me in ways she couldn't take back. She said she was proud of the foundation, that it was the kind of thing I'd always talked about doing, and she was sorry she never believed in me enough to stick around and see it happen. I read it twice. Then I closed my laptop and went for a walk. It was raining, that soft Bay Area drizzle that doesn't really soak you but just hangs in the air. I walked down to Ocean Beach, stood on the sand, and watched the waves come in. I didn't respond to the email. Not because I was angry, but because there wasn't anything to say. She wasn't part of this anymore. The foundation, the work, the kids learning to code in community centers across the East Bay, that was the story now. She was just a chapter, one I'd already closed. I moved out of David's place in December. Bought a small house in Daly City, nothing fancy, 3 bedrooms, a garage I converted into an office. I kept working part-time at Nextbridge, mentoring the new engineers, helping with architecture decisions. The rest of my time went to the foundation. We were scaling to San Jose and Sacramento, building partnerships with more schools, more community centers. One afternoon in January, almost exactly a year after the divorce was finalized, I got a letter forwarded from my old apartment. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper, handwritten. You were right about everything. I just wish I'd seen it sooner. I hope you find someone who deserves you. It wasn't signed, but I recognized the handwriting. I folded the paper once, walked to the fireplace, and dropped it in. Not out of spite, just out of completion. That version of my life was over. This one. The one where I was helping kids learn to build things, to create opportunities for themselves, to see a path forward they didn't know existed, this was the one that mattered. Some people think revenge is about making someone pay. But real victory isn't loud. It's not about proving someone wrong or watching them fail. It's about building something so meaningful that the people who doubted you become irrelevant. It's about waking up every day and knowing you're doing work that matters, not because it hurts someone else, but because it helps people who need it. Jennifer got her new beginning. She married the finance guy, moved to a condo in Pacific Heights, posts photos of wine tastings and ski trips. I see them sometimes when I scroll through social media late at night, and I don't feel anything. Not anger, not satisfaction, just distance. I got something different. I got 200 kids who are learning to code. I got emails from parents who never thought their children would have a chance at a 6-figure job. I got to watch a 17-year-old kid from Richmond build his first app and cry when he showed his mom. That's the win. Not the money, not the court case, not the headlines. The win is building something that lasts longer than your pain. And some mornings, when I'm driving to a community center in Oakland to meet with a new cohort, I think about that text message from a year ago. The one that ended my marriage in 3 lines. And I'm grateful. Because it freed me to become the person I was always supposed to be. Not the guy chasing stock options and hoping someone would notice, but the guy who took what he earned and turned it into something bigger than himself. Some endings are loud. Some are quiet. Mine was both. Loud in the courtroom, quiet in the years that followed. And in the silence, I found something better than revenge. I found purpose.